Hey, everybody. This is Brian. Just wanted to give you a quick heads up about this episode. We had a slight technical issue about 10 minutes in, and interview goes from sounding like I have a good mic to like I'm giving a conference call inside of a shower. So I apologize in advance for the audio issues on my end. I wanted to make my guest sound even better than he already is. But it's a great interview, and I thought it was too good to not share it. So sorry for the inconvenience, but I hope you enjoy it and learn a lot. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Uncommon Comedy Podcast. I'm excited today. We got a fantastic episode. I feel like I say that every time, but this is, it's true. Today, I got a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, very funny comedian. He performs all over the world. He performs for the troops. He performs all over the country. And he's also a crowd audience warm-up. I can speak. He's also the audience warm-up comic for the Conan O'Brien Show. He's a very, very, very funny guy. And please welcome my dear friend, Mr. Gary Cannon, to the show. Gary.
Hi, Brian.
What's up, buddy?
It's so, what's so funny about these podcasts and Zoom calls? I think people are seeing more of each other now than they had before. It's crazy because it's bringing people together. It's nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way to reach out and connect to everybody. But and you get to see their houses, which is nice.
Well, obviously you're covering something up. That's a backdrop.
Yes.
You can see my crappy house.
Yeah, I have dead bodies behind here, so it's it's really more of a legal issue.
I do love how you see people haven't you noticed that's kind of the truth when people do like Zoom calls and they're celebrities, you're trying to figure out like where they are and what their situation is. I saw, did you see when Tom Hanks hosted Saturday Night Live? It was like the first virtual SNL that they did, and he hosted it, and he was in this little kitchen, and I said to my wife, I said, that's not his house. There's just, maybe it was a guest house or whatever, but there was no way this tiny kitchen, and it was nice, but there was no way that was his place. But it's funny to kind of analyze like where people are and what it looks like behind them.
Right, absolutely. And it always seems, at least for like sports shows or whatever, it's always the bookshelf, and then they got to like display the bookshelf and then all the different books that they have to show that they're, literate. And...
Well, I had to laugh because if you've watched the news lately, you're down in San Diego, I'm up in LA, but one of the weather guys, Dallas Raines, you know who that guy is, right? You've heard Dallas Raines. So he's been doing the weather from his house. And I'm like, not only does he have the easiest gig in TV when he has to go to the studio, but now he's walking from his kitchen into the living room just doing the weather. I'm like, this couldn't be any easier than it was. I mean, like, I bet the hardest part is probably him putting the suit on. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Standing by his fireplace. I'm like, wow, TV weathermen make pretty good money. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say in the beginning, one of my favorite things about you and that I love so much about you and watching you perform is you are absolutely fearless with the material that you'll, not that you're dirty, or anything like that or filthy or anything, but like, you're kind of like you do a lot of crowd work, and you're kind of like a sophisticated modern Don Rickles, if I can give that as a compliment.
I love it.
So it's not all racial or anything like that. It's just kind of busting on people here and there, and then you'll even bust on the headliners that you're working with when you're trying. I saw you work with Ralphie May, and you say comments into the mic and to his crowd and just busting on him, and you would hear him laugh and just and I love that. And the other thing you do too is you just speak what's in the mind of every comic as the show's going on. So most comics will think, oh, this isn't going well. You'll come out and go, oh, this isn't going well, and it just adds a whole different level of hilarity to the show, especially the comics die in the back watching you, and I love that. I think it's an amazing trait that you have.
Yeah, one of the things I love to do is when I'm on a show with a bunch of other comics, and I love like being sandwiched in the middle. And the first line is always, hey guys, this is where the cover charge starts to make sense. And I love throwing out that line. And then when I get the first laugh, I always say, hey, comics in the back, this is called a laugh. And I'll never forget. This was a couple of months ago, right before the pandemic and everything kind of shut down. We were at Comedy and Magic Club, and Comedy and Magic Club every weekend does the 10 comic show. So everybody goes up, they do 7 minutes, boom, boom, boom. And what I usually do is, if a joke doesn't work, I will say, hey, if you guys don't start laughing, I'm going to bring up XYZ comic again. And then they'll start moaning. I'll be like, guys, don't moan. You weren't laughing either. And it's funny. It's funny if I do it when I know the person, whether it's like an Amir K or like a Brian Kiley, whatever. But I remember one night I did it, and it was a guy, and I won't say his name, but he did not do well. He didn't do well. And he was a shorter guy. He was a very short, like under 5 foot. So when I said, if you guys don't start laughing, I'm going to bring the short comic back up here again. And they knew immediately. And I usually don't like to risk that, just because I always feel like I need to have a relationship with that person to kind of start making fun. But I did it just because he did do so poorly and the audience knew it. And, I mean, listen, there's been times where, I've hosted shows, and, I work with Steve Byrne a lot, and Steve's the king of allowing guest sets, sort of like what Ralphie was. Like, for those who don't know, a guest set is just somebody who does a few minutes of time between the opener and the feature, just 5-6 minutes. So Steve always allows people to come up and do sets. And boy, oh boy, there was one night where he allowed this guy to come up, and it was just horrible. And he did very poorly. And not only was the material bad, he just looked like he was brand new, and he was racist. I mean, he really pissed off the crowd. And I just remember going up there and just being like, hey, does anybody else from the audience want to try this? And it really diffuses them. I mean, because listen, you can't go up there and just be like, hey, how about a round of applause for Larry? Like, you're like, no, Larry bombed. It was bad. You know what I mean? So you can't go up there, cheerleading, like, how great was that? I mean, that's the whole warm-up of the idea of the host, or even a warm-up guy. But, you have to acknowledge what they just saw. And I got to remember, Brian, like years ago, and it was so funny because he went on to be an executive at Comedy Central, but we were up in Seattle and we were doing a gig, and there was a guy who went up on stage, hadn't done it in forever, and Steve encouraged him, and he got off stage, and I was dumping on him and dumping on him and dumping on him. And that was getting bigger laughs than his set. And it was just funny because later, years later, he turned out to be like this huge executive at Comedy Central. It's like, oh no, not that they were booking me for anything anyway, but it's just really, really funny. And now what's crazy is Comedy Central seems to be going extinct. I think they're going out of business, from what I understood. Yeah. So, but I do love that, just kind of, interpersonal, bringing them in, like, it's so funny. Years and years ago, when I first started, kind of hitting the road, I did a gig in Appleton, Wisconsin, and I went up there, and I was featuring, and I was just really off the rails and going crazy. And I remember the headliner came up to me and was furious, like just furious, because he didn't want to follow it. He didn't know me. And, you have that thing in your head. Do you pull back and maybe not do as good, but you're going to please the headliner, or do you do what you're going to do? I mean, what would you have done in that situation? Because then I'll share the story of what I did.
Right. I would probably, that would be, I guess I would probably end up pulling back, just because I want to work the week, and just appease that. And then, realize you're probably never going to work with them again.
So basically, it's always funny to me when you have a comic, like somebody that you don't know, and you're going to a venue where they're not selling tickets, and they'll ask you not to do crowd work. And you're like, well, what's the reason for that? I mean, that's kind of what I do. I mean, that's, why this club hired me specifically, because they just know that I can bring that to the table. And I remember, it was a 5-night run somewhere, and the first night I didn't do crowd work just to appease the headliner. And I was so uncomfortable, and it just wasn't fun. And I was like, well, why am I up here suffering for the week when he doesn't own the club, when he's not the one who made the decision, he's not the guy selling tickets? Listen, if you get a call from Brian Regan and he says, can you open for me, but can you not swear? Can you not do crowd work? Of course, that's the game, right? But when you're working with somebody that you've never worked with before, they didn't request you, they're not paying you out of their pocket, they're not cutting you a percentage of their money, You guys were both just randomly placed there on the weekend. I got to be honest with you. I don't think that that's my issue to deal with. I think it's the club's issue. I
Yeah.
think I think maybe then it was a bad booking. The club should have looked into it a little bit better about, who they paired people with. I mean, that's the way, they would never pair you up with somebody that did what you did. You know what I mean?
Right, like Frank Caliendo, right.
Of course. And then if they did that, that would be a bad booking on their part because they didn't do research on who you were.
Right.
So that's my thing.
Yeah, and I think true with that, it's also, it's the headliner's job to bring them home. Like if you can't follow it, then that shame on you. I would try to, like sometimes I'll ask, is there anything in particular that's like your signature bit, or so that I don't step on anything. If it's someone I've never worked with, like, and they're like, oh, it's whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, I won't do this voice that touches on
Right.
Like I try to be respectful that way, but for the most part, I would want to do what I do. If it was somebody, like you said, like a Brian, Regan or whatever, you would definitely, kind of
listen.
bow to them.
And I remember Brian when I was working on cruise ships, and I would do 10 minutes up front, and then the headliner would come on and do 30. Now I did more shows, but they did more time.
Right.
So I remember sometimes, after shows, comics would come up to me. They'd be like, "Hey, don't get them all wild up. Don't get them this. Don't get them that." It's like, well, hey, listen. First of all, you're making double the money than I am.
Right.
You're also doing less shows than I am. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this crowd on board. You know what I'm saying? So, that always offends me too. It's like, you're making way more money than I am. You should be able to. And by the way, if there's an issue here, like if there's an issue in terms of like you not wanting to follow this, let's just switch and I'll take the extra money.
Exactly.
There's no problem.
Yeah.
There's no problem with that. I'll do that. So, you know how it is. I mean, listen, you don't mean to be egotistical, but if somebody has a problem following it, then let's switch. There's no
Right.
issue in it for me. I don't have an ego attached to it.
Right, and it's always, for me, I've always want to be the best person on the show.
Of course.
Like, regardless, whether, and I do want to be better than the headliner because that's how you become the headliner.
Of course. And why should you, listen, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, we don't want you doing this, this, and this, and then you go out there and subconsciously all you're thinking about is not doing that.
Right.
Well, then it's not going to be good for the show. It's not going to be good for the audience. I mean, what good? It's a lose-lose.
Yeah. So I revised my answer and I say that I would absolutely do what I do in that scenario.
And by the way, we're in Appleton, Wisconsin. I mean, it's
Right.
like, well, listen, at the end of the day, if the club doesn't have me back, they're probably doing me a favor. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's fine. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing better than kind of being at that Ralphie status and being like, hey, I don't care if I never come back here. It's okay. Like, it doesn't matter to me. You're doing me a favor by not having me back. It's great.
Right.
You mean I don't have to come back out for $400, no airfare in a condo? It's like, I'm fine with it. I'll stay home.
Yeah.
Of course.
So, you talked a little bit about the kind of bagging on a comic, and the general rule is, you try to be that professional, and because we all have bad sets, we all, whatever, and it's that sort of like, okay, let's not insult the comic too much, but like you said, there's that balance of like, when they do so bad, you have to, like, the audience knows it, it, and you can't. Especially as a host, you can't lie to the crowd.
Well, if you come out there and say, how great was that? Or how about a round of applause? I mean, you're
Right.
insulting their intelligence. I mean, it's just like, it looks terrible. Yeah. By the way, did you steal that coffee mug from a local diner? Oh my goodness. That looks like something that you get at Norm's. You're just like, This service stunk today. Deb, grab one. We're taking these home.
Yeah, I have the salt and pepper holder in the other room. So.
That's what you're going to start bringing to the restaurants when they start opening back up.
Exactly.
Bring your own glass. I just saw that. I was like, that looks like every mug at any diner that I've ever gone to.
I got it at Pier 1's going out of business sales. So let me ask you this. Let's rewind a little bit. How did you get into comedy? What inspired you to start stand-up?
Well, I think for years and years and years, I was the class clown in school and just always the goof around. And, I think the funny thing was, looking back on life, is that my parents would always get upset with me for just being a screwball. However, I got good grades. So that balance things out. Because if I was messing around and getting detention and getting suspended, which I did, and had bad grades, that would have been, 2 strikes. But because we had something, I don't know if you guys had this in school. Did you guys have a citizenship grade, like 1 through 5, where it was based on how your behavior was? Okay. So we had 1 through 5. 1 was the best. 5 was just you were out of control. So it was weird that I would get like A's and B's and then like a 4 or 5 in citizenship. So my parents would always have trouble looking at that and being like, well, he's doing well. I know he's being a disruption, but I remember one time my mom always had my back because I would get in trouble a lot. And I remember one time back in, I don't know, my junior year, my senior year of high school, I got suspended. I was suspended for like 3 or 4 days for calling one of my teachers a name. And I'll never forget, I was off for 3 or 4 days. And Brian, I lived in a small little court with, a bunch of other houses of kids that went to my school. And there was nobody around, like ever, because they.
Did you get a call again? Did you get a call again? Oh no, I hear
Yeah, but I okay, good. So it was funny. It was funny because what happened was I was home all day. My mom worked during the day, and then my dad would leave for work at like 3 or 4 at night in the afternoon. And what happened was there was nobody around, just nobody. And my dad like never put 2 and 2 together that like, why in the world is Gary home from school? Where are all these other kids? So my mom always covered for me, which was kind of a nice thing that she did. It was pretty awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but it was hard. It was hard to argue. So I was always kind of the class goof up. And then, just so many things, like just looking back, I'll never forget there was a time in high school where me and my buddies, I can't believe I'm sharing this story, but me and my buddies worked at a sporting goods store. And, we would, take a couple of things here and there, right? Like just, like sneak them out the back door. And so I'll never forget this, Brian. We would take stuff, just dumb kids, right?
Right.
And I remember one time, this is no joke, one of my accounting teachers called me out into the hallway and he said, hey, listen, I don't know what's going on. He said, I kind of have a feeling I know what's going on. But if you guys keep running your mouths the way you are in class, you guys are going to get caught and something major is going to happen. So I'm just telling you, not as a teacher, but as a friend, to just keep it quiet or knock it off. Like he was being very heartfelt, like this, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I come back into the classroom and everybody's like, oh my gosh, what did Mr. Rohde say? What did Mr. Rohde say? And without hesitation, I said, he needs a size 11. and like that was, and you're like, what do you do? Like this guy was wanting to help me. You know what I mean? And this was the payback that I gave him. Like, just threw him right under the bus. Like, oh, well, screw him. You know what I mean? Like, and he looked at me like, well, why am I trying to help you? You know what I mean? Right. So, I just remember that. And then I remember going to college and then like, like all kids, like you just don't know what you want to do right out of college. And this just shows you how much patience my parents had. Because out of school, Brian, this was crazy. I got a degree in journalism, and right out of school, I got a job working for a small newspaper in northern Michigan. That doesn't happen. I mean, at the time when I graduated from college, not only were people not getting jobs, they weren't getting jobs in their field. I got this job and I hated it. At least I thought I hated it. Brian, I swear to God, I worked there 3 days, and I quit. I quit. And even the guy said to me, the editor, and I was making like $8 an hour, which isn't much more than I'm making now. But he says to me, he's like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to quit? And I was like, absolutely. And I just remember then getting a job working in the accounting department of a property management company, but using absolutely zero skill set of my degree. Right. And I was there for a long time before I decided to move to California. And when I got out here, when I lived in San Francisco with my brother for a little bit, I saw an ad for a guy that was teaching comedy classes. And I was like, that sounds kind of cool. It sounds kind of interesting. And that was kind of my first foray into getting up on stage and kind of doing it, and it was funny, as you know, because we joke about this, because you and I taught stand-up together, which is how we became close friends. But this guy was teaching classes as a seminar. He was doing a big seminar. And I saw the number and I just missed the seminar. It was like the Sunday beforehand when I saw the ad. And I called him and I was like, hey, man, I missed the seminar. He's like, you're in luck. I do private sessions. And I was like, of course you do. Yeah, of course. And then Brian, this was back before like internet or email and stuff. So he sent me a packet of what he does, and he said, "You're exactly the kind of person I'm looking for." And I was like, "What? Because I have a checkbook? Like, what do you mean I'm looked at? How would you know that based on the 30 seconds we chatted on the phone?" Right. So I did those one-on-ones for a little bit, started doing stand-up. Then I took a bunch of time off because I was just unhappy and I wasn't good. And the game when you start, like you go to a club, or I'm sorry, like a coffee shop, and you're the first one there, yet you're the last one on. You're just like, well, wait a minute, I was here like 3 hours before you started. Why am I and then you realize it's a game of people who know everybody and they're going to let their friends up first. So I remember stopping, doing a series of just horrible, unfun day jobs. And it was at some point where I was just like, I'm going to move to LA. Even though I was very comfortable in San Francisco and I was getting work and it was a small, great little local scene, I just felt like you couldn't do anymore. I just felt like, what more can you do here without just being like the top dog in San Francisco? So that was why I kind of was like, I got to move down. So I'd been doing stand-up maybe 4 years, from 1998 to 2002. And then I was like, I'm going to move down to LA. Even though none of my friends were doing it, I felt like, screw it, I'm going to run that risk.
Right. What was the difference in the scene from San Fran to LA? San Fran's got a long history of
yeah, I mean, listen, again, San Francisco, you're that big fish in a small pond. Down in LA, nobody cares. And so what I found myself doing, I remember my brother helped me move down, and we rented a U-Haul, and I found a roommate on Craigslist, and I was living in Santa Monica, and had this great place by the beach. But it was crazy because you couldn't get stage time here in LA. You just couldn't. And I just remember, which is where I met you, because I would drive from LA to Orange County to do stand-up because it was easier to get on stage. Now, the ride was brutal, just the drive getting down there, but at least you were waiting in your car and not at the specific club or the coffee shop.
Right.
Like, to me, I would rather sit and not play the game in LA, but because you and I met at some of those, like Terry the Funny Plumber shows, and like these weird rooms, like AA clubs and all this other stuff. So to me, that was kind of a cool way of avoiding that line that was up in LA, and then just got better from there. Just would get more stage time from that area. You know what I mean? I'll never forget somebody we know was up on stage at a little coffee shop, and someone went up on stage and said they went to a gas station and they asked for a key to the bathroom. They handed them that big hubcap with the key on it. And this buddy of ours looked at me and just said, "I can't believe he's doing that joke." And I was like, "I know, right?" Like laughing. And then he's like, "That's my joke." And I was like, I thought we were going to agree like that was a bad joke, but he looked at it like that was my joke. You know what I mean? Yeah. By the way, I remember there were times on the road where I had no material and I had to stretch and do 30 minutes. And I remember asking Steve Maison if I could, use a couple of his jokes while I was on the road. And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I remember doing a couple of Steve's jokes. And I remember when my wife and I went to go see the premiere of Steve's movie, Dying to Do Letterman. Right. And in there, he's obviously doing a bunch of stand-up. And he does one of the jokes that I used to do. And my wife looks at me and was like, "I thought that was your joke." And I was just like, "Oh, sweetie, not even glad. This is," you know what I'm saying? Like, there was a long issue of me having, you know what I mean? It was just really, really funny. So, so when I finally moved in 2002, I just felt comfortable. And, I got a day job when I was down in LA. And it's crazy because I worked at this same day job when I was up in San Francisco, but it was a different division of the company down here in LA. And I got to tell you, Brian, the beauty of that job was it was a one-person office, me and my boss. He was gone all the time. Like, he almost kind of had this thing down like I did. Like the minute he left, I would leave. Because it was a sales job, so you'd be expected to be out on the road. So the minute he would leave, I would start going to TV shows, TV tapings, and just start watching people do audience warm-up. And that was kind of how I got into, the gig back in 2003, because I was just out there researching it when I should have been at this day job, which was crazy because I was getting paid. You know what I mean? Right. It was insane. Yeah.
That's so funny. So when did things start to kind of click for you a little bit stand-up wise?
Listen, I got really lucky in terms of being in the right place at the right time, because for I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times when I was up in San Francisco, I worked with Brett Butler.
Mhm.
So Brett Butler always asked for me, always said, hey, I want Gary to open, whatever it was. So when I moved down to LA, I got a call from the Improv and they said, hey, Brett Butler wants you to feature for her in Ontario. I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a big move. And I'll never forget this, Brian. And it was kind of a game changer. That specific weekend that she had asked for me, I was supposed to be out in Omaha, Nebraska for this training seminar for the job that I was working. And this gig came up very last minute, as you know they do. I mean, nobody's ever giving you 3 weeks notice. So I remember calling Steve Mazon, a friend of ours, and I said, I don't know what to do. I got to be in Omaha like in 3 days. And I just got this offer that could, maybe change things, maybe not change things. I don't know. He said, did you move down to LA for a day job or for comedy? And I said, well, comedy. So here was the greatest thing. I had to call my boss, one-person office. I remember sitting in the parking lot somewhere, and I remember calling him, and I got his voicemail. And I said, hey, TJ, unfortunately, I can't make it. Something, boom, boom, boom. He never called me back. I knew he was pissed. Here was the best part, Brian. I did the weekend with Brett Butler. All went great. On that Monday, we're both sitting in the office. He walks in, and he said, I'm so disappointed that you missed the weekend of training. You missed some great stuff. We're going to sit down and talk about it at lunch, and I'll go over everything that you missed. And you could tell he was upset. He was a nice guy.
Right.
And to this day, I still talk to him. So I felt like it was that kind of whole dad thing where you disappointed him. The funniest part was, Brian, we never, ever talked about it again. So almost like he knew that it was nonsense.
Yeah.
Yes, it was nonsense, but he felt like he had to discipline me and be like, hey, we got to talk about this. We never talked. I remember the phone rang and I grabbed it and I said, hey, TJ, it's for you. And he's like, we'll talk about this at lunch. And we never talked about it again. And that Brett Butler weekend led to me auditioning for regular spots at the Hollywood Improv at I auditioned at 3:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The guy who was booking it said, he offered me spots right then and there. Because again, you're going up 3 PM in front of a room of all other comics. It's brutal.
Right.
I think the thing that helped me was I played off the fact that, hey, this is going badly. Don't worry, I'll edit in the laughs. I'm sending this tape to Letterman. It was all just nonsense. You know what I mean? And somehow it worked. And from there, it was just a crazy kind of couple months because I got passed at the Hollywood Improv. And right at that moment, I got the gig doing warm-up at the Late Late Show with Craig Kilborn. So 2 great things happened at the end of 2003, which was pretty amazing. And it was that gig, which paid nothing, that I just said, you know what, I'm going to throw it to the wall and quit my day job. And I did. And I just, even though it paid very little, I was just like, I got to do it. Just, and listen, there's certainly been times over and over again that you look back and you're like, hey, there's going to be another day job out in the future for you. But you hope, because you've been doing it for so long, that maybe, you throw caution in the wind and everything is going to be okay.
Yeah, that's funny. It's always an interesting story to hear when things start to shift over to full time.
It was an interesting time. It was this very, very cool, and by the way, I was the second guy in the warm-up world at the Late Late Show with Craig Kilborn. So there was another guy who was the full-time guy, and I was the stepchild. So I would always go in when he couldn't do it because he had a sitcom and he was making way more money. And the truth was, they didn't like me. They wanted Roger there full-time.
Right.
They were never happy with me. I think, Craig would look and be like, oh, Gary's here. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't think that they were happy that I was the lead guy. And it wasn't until I got my first real gig, which was my own gig at Last Call with Carson Daly, where I felt like, wow, I can breathe a sigh of relief because this is my gig. I'm not sharing it with anybody.
Right.
And that was, and I have a funny story about how I got that gig, which was funny because at the time they were auditioning people to be the warm-up for that show. And I was so kind of unhappy in that Late Late Show environment, whether it was Kilborn or Ferguson. I wasn't happy because I was always the underling of somebody.
Right.
That when Carson Daly was moving his show from New York to LA, I started making calls to New York, leaving messages for people. Hey, I know that you're bringing the show out to LA. I would love to be considered. Boom, boom, boom. And I randomly got a call and they said, we want you to come in and audition. We're going to do a couple of test shows. And I'll never forget this, Brian. One night we were doing 2 shows and I only did the first show and there was another warm-up doing the second one. I don't remember who it was. So I do the first one. the audience loads out. They're going to come right back in and see the second show. Like, it's going to be the exact same audience seeing the second show, but it's going to be the new warm-up, right?
Okay.
As I'm leaving, the crowd was like, hey, man, you were great. We'll see you back inside. And I was like, oh, guys, I'm not doing the second show. There's another guy doing it. And they're like, oh, man, sorry about that. And I said, hey, guys, just so you know, the producers thought you were a little too loud. Just a little too loud, a little over the top. Can you guys pull it back for the second show? And listen, I don't know what they did or if that got me any further ahead, but I just remember getting the gig and just being like, hey, maybe my throwing the next guy under the bus system worked. You know what I mean? It was
hysterical.
just, I was like, listen, I want to move into my own place. I got to figure out what I need to do to get this gig, which was, and listen, it worked because like 3 days later, I got a call saying that, hey, you're the new guy. And that made me feel so good. I was so happy.
That's hysterical, man. That's so funny. I I always wonder the differences in like crowd warm up, like, because that's something just talking to the crowd. Did you always talk to do crowd work in your stand up? Was that something you incorporated? What kind of brought that in? Because that's like, I am petrified.
Well, listen, I've said this a million times. The reason I started doing audience warm, or the reason I started doing crowd work, is I just didn't have material. That was the whole reason. I just didn't have enough material to fill a feature spot, whatever. So I started going to the crowd and hoping for the best. So, that was really the only reason in terms of like, not having the time. That was it. And then I remember seeing somebody do the audience warm up. I remember I was down in LA when I was still living in San Francisco. I was down in LA seeing a taping of The Tonight Show. And I remember I flew down because Howard Stern was going to be on The Tonight Show. So I flew down, and as I'm waiting in line, they come up to us in the audience. They say, hey, Howie Mandel's got a daytime talk show. Do you guys want to come sit in on it before The Tonight Show? We'll get you out in plenty of time. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but they were obviously short audience members, right?
Right.
So I'm sitting there in the audience. I see some guy come out. He's like, hey, where you from? What's going on? Oh, you live in, blah, 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 blah. Like, and I was just like, glad. I was like, what is this guy doing, right? And then I went to go see The Tonight Show. They had a guy. And I was like, what is this job? That's kind of a cool thing. So when I finally moved down to LA and started researching it, I was like, oh, this is a full-time profession. This is kind of a cool thing that, you could get involved with. Didn't know much about it until I started hanging out at the Late Late Show and kind of watching what that guy did. And the only reason I ended up getting that gig was because Roger had another kind of an underling that filled in for him, and they weren't happy with that person. Right. So they were looking, and I was in the right place at the right time. They auditioned me and two other guys. Fortunately, Roger was the guy that kind of got to pick who got the gig. So, I owe a lot to him, and I owe a lot to Steve Byrne, because Steve was the guy that got me my very first sitcom. He was the guy that got me Sullivan and Son, and I had never done a sitcom before. And those are a lot harder because, those gigs take 4 or 5 hours to tape, and you got to just be out there over and over again, just entertaining them and keeping that energy up, even though the show's taking a while to film, or even though the show might not be as funny as they had hoped it would be. And listen, Brian, a lot of these new shows, nobody knows these shows. Nobody knows the actors. They take forever to film, and you're just out there just, but I will say that Steve's show got me so many other gigs that, I'm so beneficial because of that. It just led to, other sitcoms, which are hard to get into.
Right. I was going to ask you the differences between like sitcom versus, like, I know you did infomercials. I know you did, I've seen your demo reel.
Listen. Yeah, well, you're the only one, because there's like, because listen, the reason Kilborn was as good for me as it was is because on Conan, I do 15 minutes. That show starts right on time. There's never a delay. There's never a hiccup. It moves. So it's the script that I do is very routine. With Craig, you didn't know how much time you were going to do. You didn't know if he was backstage, if he was still getting ready, if the guest was late. So there were times I'd do 15 minutes. There were times I'd do 30 minutes. And again, I didn't have it. So you were forced to stretch. Now, most shows are pretty structured, most of the talk shows. But with a sitcom, because they're refilming those scenes over and over and over again, you could be out there for 45 minutes before they start filming the next scene. And, that's what becomes brutal. And I remember when Steve asked me to do a sitcom, he said, they're going to call you and they're going to offer you the job. Well, the producer called me and he said, I got to be honest with you, I can't hire you. You don't have any sitcom experience. And I said to Steve, I was like, well, they're not going to hire me. And he said, it's my show. Like, of course they're going to hire you. So if it was, and listen, that was another show that gave me that kind of structure of having to fill so much time because it was a brand new show and we stretched. Listen, there's nothing worse than that first scene, which is called the cold open, taking an hour and a half to film. I mean, you got to remember, Brian, these people get there at like 3-4 o'clock. They load in. Show starts at 6. Now it's 7:30, and we've only gotten through one scene. I don't care. How many dance contests can you do before this audience is like, this is a scam? Like, what are we? They're using us. I mean, why are we here? And the idea is like, hey guys, wait 4 more hours. We'll toss you a half a sandwich and a small bottle of water. Like, it's like it's a tough thing for an audience just to sit there. You know what I mean?
Well, especially like you said, if it's a show that's new and nobody knows anything about,
nobody knows
or don't know the actors.
Yeah, listen, I'll never forget the one time I was doing a show and I was interviewing an audience member, and Roy Wood Jr., who was on the show, yells up to the guy, hey, what do you do for a living? And the guy said, I just got out of prison. And you're like, oh, well, that just sums up the audience right now, because you're like, they're here to make money. Like they have to hire paid groups that will sit and fill the seats because people just don't know the show. I mean, listen, Friends, Big Bang Theory, Mike and Mike, like, there's a waiting list for those shows. I mean, and those shows could run 8 hours. Nobody cares.
Right.
And nobody cares if there's food. They're just excited to be there. They flew in, from Michigan to see the show. But these other shows, they're hard. It's, listen, Brian, it's a Tuesday in February. Who's coming out? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, people are gone and they want to go see Ellen. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Right. And it's like, she's not available. Here, come see this other thing.
Listen, I'll never forget, there were days working at Carson Daly that unless he had a big band on, like Fall Out Boy or Panic at the Disco, the last 3 rows would be empty. I mean, it was crazy. You would just see empty chairs. And, when you're trying to fill up or warm up an audience with, so many less people, it's insane. I mean, that vibe is gone. I remember one time I was doing the gig. I was doing the warm up at Carson Daly, and I had to announce that the band that was supposed to be there canceled. And literally right in front of me, Brian, I see people walking right out. Like, they didn't, you think they cared that they were being rude? Like, they walked out right in front of me. They were done. Right. So there are those moments. There's also those moments where you pull up and it's like this huge band like Green Day, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm here working, getting to see this band. This is pretty awesome. You know what I mean? That's a pretty cool thing where you're doing virtually nothing.
That's pretty cool. So
those are great days.
Yeah. So what is I see a lot of comics try to do crowd work and they fail miserably. What are some of the issues or what kind of advice do you have for comics? What do they do wrong a lot of the times when dealing with the crowd?
Well, listen, it's one of those things. It's one of those things where, and I know this will happen once the state order gets lifted, once people are back to work because they can't get road work. I get hit up all the time about people saying, hey, I want to be in town more. I want to be with my family more. Audience warm-up looks great. How do I go about getting it? Or can you recommend me for a gig? Not even like, hey, can I come watch you? Can I see what you do? It's all like, well, you're doing it, so I assume that I can be doing it as well. Right. I would never say to somebody working a cruise ship, hey, well, you're on cruises. I mean, it's very insulting. Like, Brian, you do impressions. I can do that too. It seems easy enough, right? It's very, what people don't realize is you've worked 20 plus years perfecting every nuance there is, and it just it's that thing. But so what people don't realize is it's hard because what most comics see is they'll come in and watch Conan, and they'll see it's a great day. The audience is great, this, that, and the other thing. And those are the days where they're like, I can do that. I can do it easy. What they don't see are the days where the audience stinks, the producer's yelling at you, the script is bad, it's taking 6 hours to film this thing, the actors don't know their lines. That's when you're getting paid your money to do what you do. I mean, those are the brutal days. And again, I've been doing it for so long that it just becomes second nature now. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, I can tell when the audience is watching the sizzle reel before we start, boy, oh boy, they're not upbeat. They're not laughing at parts that I know they should be laughing at. So I got to go out even harder. I got to go out guns blazing. I got to make sure that I get this crowd because, the good news is with a talk show, there's always a show the next day. So there is kind of a little bit of a pass. But with a sitcom, they're only filming 22 episodes. So you got to remember, Brian, if the audience stinks, it's a whole nother week before that show gets in front of another audience. So they're stewing on how bad it was throughout that week. So that's the problem that you face. They're like, oh my God, well, that audience was bad. And listen, I've been on the reverse side of it where I've gotten calls from shows where the audience was bad. You think they care that the writing was bad or the show was bad or, the actors didn't know their lines. They're like, hey, we're going to have to let you go. And we're like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, I don't think anybody that does warm-up can save this show. It's like, the world of audience warm-up is you're always the last person thanked when the audience is great. Just, when the audience is bad, you're to blame. When the audience is great, they were just good. So I think that people, this, Brian, when we first started doing stand-up, people would take these road gigs and they would start featuring and they'd be like, oh, I can go out on the road and just feature, but it's 30 minutes. I'll just do crowd work. It's just like, but do you realize like how bad that sounds? You know what I mean? You can't do crowd work. It's like, no. I mean, there's a skill set to it.
Right. I had a comic tell me once, he goes, well, I can headline. It's a 45-minute spot. I do 20 minutes of material, and then I'll just do 25 minutes of crowd work. And I was like, that's not how that works.
They really believe that. They really, but in fairness, if it's one of those lousy casinos or lousy bars in like Northern Oregon, great, you're going to get what you pay for. If you're going to pay somebody $75 to drive up, that's what you're going to get. You know what I mean? But when you're putting, that's why I always love these clubs. It's like, they haven't bumped up the money, but yet they want you to be better than you were the last time they saw you. You know what I mean?
It's still the same from the 80s. Like, it's crazy.
Listen, I got into it one time because I was working at a club with Steve, and it was a club here. It was a club here in L.A. It was Ontario. It was the Ontario Improv. And, listen, I've known that manager out there for a long, long time. And I was working with him, and it was an 8 o'clock show. And I reached out and I said, hey, I'm going to be there right at 8 o'clock. And he wrote me and he said, hey, just so you know, you should be here 15 or 20 minutes before the headliner. And I said, for $50? And he said, oh, well, if that's your attitude, you don't have to put in for avails anymore. And I said, dude, I didn't put in for avails. Steve asked me to do this. And I said, I would love to know any of your other openers that work your club that just finished working for a TV show that are now coming out for, 1/12 of the money. You know what I mean? Like you're busting my hump for this. It doesn't make sense. And like, I'm going to be there. I'm going to give you a great show. I'm coming from LA. By the way, if there's an issue, why don't you put me up at a hotel the night before? Why don't you, you know what I mean? Like there's always that thing. And I'll never forget that. I was just like, and I said, the only reason your other openers are on time is because they live with their parents. They're going to be there because they want to start sucking up your alcohol for free.
Right. They're not doing anything. They're not working.
They're not doing a thing. So why wouldn't they be there? Of course. Yeah.
That's so crazy. So bringing that back to stand up a little bit, I always hear this a lot, and I know you probably do too. There's that fear from the audience of like, I don't want to get picked on.
Right.
What advice do you have for audience members to when interacting with a comic who's doing crowd work so that it's bearable for them?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the best thing to do is just go along with it. I mean, the thing is, you don't want to try to upstage the guy. Because before I started doing comedy, I started doing that. Like, I'd start messing with the headliner when I would go see a show, and they would just tear me up because that's their gig. You know what I mean? Right. So, the idea is just to have fun. I know that guys, if there's like, for me, for example, I won't pick on a group if it's all guys at a table because there's that testosterone, and then they're like, hey, I'm not going to go with one of these guys and then just get the crap kicked out of me. I'm just not going to do it. You know what I mean? Right. So, I always try to make it like a guy and a girl, or you look around and see who's kind of like, they're already having a good time and they're into it. You know what I mean? Like, that's who you go for because you seem to think that they have a good sense of humor. You know what I mean? Like, one time I was doing crowd work and I was going after the guy, and the girl who was with him, like behind him, was like this, like, like going like that. And I was like, huh. And I will say, I've done this before. Like, instead of like, if I see that they're pissed, I'll jump off. Like, I don't feel the need to be like, or if they say something funny to me and they rip on me, I don't feel like I have to be that guy that's like, I'm getting you better. Like, I will always take the line and be like, I got to be honest with you, that was better than what I had. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong with that because I don't see anything wrong with it. I thought it's fine. You know what I mean?
and it diffuses the tension or whatever. The crowd laughs, you laugh, you look like a good dude. You look more likable, more humble, and it's.
Listen, I'll never forget. I was doing warm up on a show, and it was all paid audience members, and I was talking to a girl in the front row, and I said, "Who's got a boyfriend?" And the girl applauded, and I was just being a jerk, and I was like, "Sure you do," and she's like, she got really mad. She's like, "When's your baby due?" And I was just like she was making fun of my weight, and I was like, "Okay, I got to end this very quickly." You know what I mean? Like I just got to end and diffuse this situation because you're sitting in the front row. I'm going to be with this girl for another 3 hours. We have to do something. So, it was the best way to handle it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you just got to kind of take it and run.
Yeah, listen, those comics were like, I got to get the last laugh. I don't really feel that way, to be honest with you. Listen, anytime, or like what I'll do is if they get the better of me, I'll give them a high five, and then I'll be like, oh, I got lotion on my hands or something stupid. And then that kind of diffuses that. But I never really just viciously do it because I want them to have fun at the end of the day. That's the goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What is the worst show you've ever had? Everybody loves these stories.
I think it might have been with you. Wasn't it where we were in San Diego and we heard that they were kicking people out, and then we were doing a show and there was nobody there, and then they let people leave, and then remember the guy started swinging on the windows with like a baseball bat, and then somebody yelled, "This guy's got a gun." Remember that? Mm-hmm. Didn't you and I do that, Joe?
I was there. Yeah, I was there. I wasn't, thankfully, and I took off because they were like, "That's enough of this." So.
And then I remember like they cleared everybody out, and they're like, "Hey, let's do a show for these people." It's like, listen, there's a million of them. I mean, there's that one. So to me, the funniest thing is when you go on the road with a bunch of buddies, right?
Right.
And everybody bombs but one of the buddies, and then you're driving. You're like, man, that audience stunk. And the one buddy who killed was like, I thought they were pretty good. You're like, no, they were bad. Like the only reason they laugh at you is your jokes are hacky. You know what I mean? Just like it is always that ego thing of like, oh no, they were bad. Listen, when I did warm up, I had so many issues where. Wow. I mean, there were just so many times where I remember Jennifer Love Hewitt was on Carson Daly one time, and there was just dead silence in the audience. I was like, oh, my gosh, I got to get something going, like some energy. And I started applauding just randomly. I don't know why. And Carson Daly looks up and he's like, why are people applauding her dog dying? Like it just showed you how little I was listening. You know what I mean?
Right.
I remember at Craig Kilborn, I had people would jump up out of their chairs and run down the stairs like they were on The Price is Right. And a buddy of mine said, don't do that. Somebody's going to get hurt. And I was like, what do you know? I mean, I know what I'm doing. And inevitably it happened. Guy twisted his leg. This is when I first started. And he's like, hey, I need to talk to the paramedic here. And I was like, paramedic? And I was just like, here's a free CD. Go sit down in your chair. Like, I was just like I didn't know any better, and it's like, you also find this out too. You also find out, I remember a couple of times doing shows where during a dance contest, somebody would fall. Like they would slip or whatever.
Right.
Nothing would happen. You okay? Everything's great. They'd get home and all of a sudden they'd call the show and be like, we're injured. And you're like, wait a minute, injured? I saw you leave. I saw you walk out. And it's because the family then says, oh, you got hurt at CBS? They got money.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to report a fall at my house. You know what I mean? Because I have no money. But But CBS's conglomerate, of course they got cash. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's always funny to me. So, I mean, there's a million of those. I mean, they just, but it's why I love what we do. And it's why I love, that we have such a great gig where I know so many people working right now that once this pandemic ends, they got to go back into the office and they're regretting it. You and I are like, let's get this over. I'm ready to get back to work. Like I'm ready to start doing what we love. I mean, this is, just killing me.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this. We did a show, and it wasn't necessarily anything you or I did. You were headlining, and I was hosting the show. And the guy before you, I won't say his name, but
okay.
I think you probably will know this already. Went on stage, and there was a table of African Americans table, and it's important for the story. The only reason I say that they were kind of chatty throughout the show. And so, there are ways to handle that. And the guy before you went up and was like, I'm going to take them out. And this was a white comic.
I remember this.
He just started going in hard on the race.
Yep.
And it got really tense, really, really fast. And the staff was like, you need to do something right now.
I remember this.
They started standing up and they were shouting, and he was trying to be funny, and it didn't go well at all.
Badly.
And so I'm like, okay, I had to walk up and pull him off stage. They cut his mic, turned the music on, and I went up and I was like, hey, they told me to, we're going to pull you, man. And he's like, but I haven't finished my 12 minutes.
Right.
I was like, yeah, you're right. You're having, like,
but we know this too, because I remember how badly that went. And that just comes from inexperience. That's just, you know what I'm saying? Like, that just comes from, that idea that maybe it worked once before, or maybe, because you've seen that over and over again. Maybe it's worked once before, but you're like, this isn't working now. It's just not, this isn't a good situation. You know what I mean? It's just not.
Yeah, it was really awkward too. And again, I don't do a ton of crowd work because I just generally don't enjoy it. And when I started, you weren't allowed to. You weren't allowed to do crowd work in Boston, so it wasn't a skill I ever really developed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was always just like, just tell your jokes, and that's just how I kind of get trained, and that's how I always was. And so I was like, all right, well, hey, I apologize for that. I just tried to like settle it because it was really tense. And I was like,
it was bad. I mean, it was the tension in the room was brutal.
Yeah, and so I tried to make a joke out of it, and it didn't go that well. And I was like, okay, hey, listen, I know that was really awkward, but we got this one guy, our last comic, super great guy, and I just hyped.
I remember that
the troops, because I was like, the troops will get him back. He just got back from performing for the troops, and this guy's awesome for the troops, ladies. I was just like trying to get at least be likable, so that you had a chance to dig out of that.
Right, because at that point you're just like, this is horrible. Like, just knowing you got to go on after that, you're like, what's happening? You know what I mean?
And this was the end of the show, so it wasn't a chance for it to build back up. There
was no chance. I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. That was San Diego.
And and I noticed you altered a little bit of you're going into the crowd at that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's crazy. I mean, but again, that's just literally just inexperience. You know what I mean? 100%. Just because he just thought he could pull it off and he couldn't. You can't.
And then once you get into that, you're like, well, I'm committed, and he stayed.
Of course.
And it was just he should.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know.
You take that loss and you go, okay, learn.
Of course, yeah. There's another show later. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
but
yeah, that one just sticks out in my mind.
I remember it now. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal. Let me ask you this: what is the best piece of advice you got about either comedy? Yeah, let's stick with stand-up. What's the best piece of advice you ever got?
Well, I think the best piece was that there's no substitute for getting on stage. None. I mean, it's just like, which always fascinates me with these guys who are like, oh, I'm not going to go out and perform. I'm just going to write. I'm going to this. I'm going to that. It's like, you got to get out there, and these guys who tell you they got 80 new minutes but haven't tried any of it. It's brutal, man. It's like, you got to get out on stage. You got to try it. You got to see what works, but most comics don't listen. I've seen it over and over again. They just don't want to put the work in. And then, you see these other guys that are hanging out every Sunday night at the Improv. They're hanging out here. They're hanging out there. But, for the most part, people are lazy. They just, they think, and part of it is because social media has changed the dynamic of things, or YouTube and all this other stuff, where people can post a video that goes viral, and that's a game changer for people. But, there's just no substitute for just getting on stage and performing. That's the bottom line. And people just feel that there's a shortcut, and there isn't.
We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, but one more question for, with all the years you've had of audience warm-up or stand-up or both, do you have any funny audience member stories that you were just like, this is amazing?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some good ones. I remember, this is one of my favorites. When I used to work at the Carson Daly Show, I used to do a dance contest, and it was always two hot chicks and some bigger guy from the Midwest that was in his 50s, right? Always. So inevitably what would happen is the two chicks would go crazy and dance. And as that second girl was dancing, I would always whisper to the guy, I would say, do me a favor, at some point during the dance, take your shirt off. And I don't know how in the world this would happen, but they would. Like 9 out of 10 times, these guys would take their shirt off, man boobs hanging out, and they'd start twirling around their shirt. It was the greatest. So what I would do is I always would give away a gift card to like Taco Bell or El Polo Loco or something like that, right? So one day I was running late and I had to get a gift card and I didn't have any. So I stopped at El Polo Loco to grab a gift card. The line was huge. So what I did was, you know how in the front you could just grab one and they're just blank?
Yeah.
They're just blank cards. So I just grabbed one and I was like, I'm just going to give this away. Nobody uses these things anyway. They're just, nobody's using an El Polo Loco gift card, especially when I tell them it has $5 on it, right? So I remember going to the show. There was a guy in the front row who I was talking to. He was from Pittsburgh, nice guy there with his family. And I told him I was going to be at the Pittsburgh Improv in a couple of weeks. We exchanged phone numbers. He said, I would love to see you, please. Maybe we could do dinner before the show. Great. He then comes up, does the dance contest. I hand him the gift card. Everybody laughs. It's $5. El Polo Loco. Boom, boom, boom. Really funny. Then later that night, I'm at the grocery store and I get a call from a 412 number. And I was like, that's Pittsburgh. He's like, hey, Gary, this is Steve. We met a couple hours ago at Carson Daly. I'm at El Polo Loco right now trying to use this gift card to buy dinner for my family. There's no money on it. And I was like, two things. First of all, he's got my number. Second of all, I can't believe anybody in the history of me giving these cards away is trying to use it, right? Because I announced that it's $5. And then he says, is there anybody here you can talk to clear the gift card? I'm like, who am I going to talk to? You know what I mean?
For $5. Yeah.
For $5. And then I just remember thinking, he's going to call the show. He's going to call the production office. He's going to get some way. Meanwhile, the story ends where I never ended up seeing him again. I just felt so bad. You know what I mean? That, it's just the bizarre thing that happened, with an El Polo Loco gift card. But it was one of my favorite kind of memories of, giving this lousy gift card away and there was no money on it. The one time, you know what I mean?
That's hysterical.
Yes.
Buddy. So if people want to find you on social media, they can check out your website, which is www.garycannon.com.
Yes.
CANON.
Yep.
We follow you on Instagram and Twitter at Cannon Comedy.
Yes.
All one word. And let's see, so I just put that out there for them. And then I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about this organization, this charity organization.
Oh, sure.
You do a lot of work with, and because that's one of the things we do here. And it's called the Little Red Dog. And
yeah, I do stuff for multiple dog charities, but yeah, this is the one that there's a lot of them, but I don't know what happened when I became this kind of like crazy dog lover. I mean, I've always had dogs, but never to this crazy extent of fostering and just being involved. And, you and I talked about this a couple of days ago. I'll get, because my wife and I have too many dogs right now, we just can't take it anymore. So my new thing with any dog rescue is I transport dogs. So if somebody calls me and they say, hey, we need you to pick up dogs from here and bring them to there, I'll do it. Anytime I'm free, and now that we're mainly free, I do it more than ever. So I just got hooked in on this thing. And I got to tell you, there's just nothing better than pulling a dog out of the shelter and putting them in the backseat of your car. We always stop at McDonald's, primarily for both of us. Right. I always get them burgers and then bring them to either a kind of a mediary spot where they're going to go next from there to another place or to a new foster home. And man, I get hooked every time. And it's crazy because last week we housed 2 pit bulls that were tied to the side of the road in Santa Ana. Wow. And there were these 2 beautiful dogs. You're like, who could have tied these dogs? I don't know what the situation was, but now they're with an amazing family in Washington State. So when you kind of see that stuff and you see where these dogs go and this great new life that they get, like, to me, that's, I look at things back in life, and I obviously want, people to, remember me as a comic, but I also love this idea of, Gary being this huge animal advocate. And I try to do as much as I can. And, our house is literally, a playground for these dogs. And, listen, if we could get in trouble for the amount that, we have, it's insane, but I will tell you, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, I wouldn't, in fact, look, I'll show you this guy. If you can see him, hold on. Let me see if you can see him. Come here, Bubba. I don't know if you can see him.
Oh.
So that guy, along with this guy, I don't know if you can see that guy.
Yep.
See that guy? Those two were abandoned, walking the streets together, and a rescue pulled them, and they said, can they stay with you short term until we figure out a better plan? And I was like, absolutely, of course. And so, it's crazy because we can't let these two interact with the other dogs, because the one dog, that the first one I showed you, is just not good with other dogs except his buddy. So, I will tell you, I'm surprised my wife and I are still married because of all the chaos. It's crazy. But I remember, Brian, one time I rescued this 85-pound shepherd from a shelter in Palmdale. I brought him home, and literally 4 days later, I was on the road for like 2 weeks. And Michelle's like, what are you doing? Like, I love this dog, but like, this dog's chewing everything in the house. Like, you left me with this mess? And I was just like, I know. And then it's just like, but then you see the dog sleeping at the end of the night, and you're like, everything's great. Like, it's just like, I love it. So I try to do as much as possible. We do these telethons for the dogs. There's just, I work with Paws for Life, People's Buddies. It's one thing that I absolutely love doing, that I feel like I can do a lot of, especially now. By the way, driving in this town, I was telling you, I went to San Diego to pick up dogs. Like, that's 2 hours. Like, when there's regular life going on, what is that, 5? I mean, it's just insane. So I'm able to do it more because of what's happening. And listen, I really believe once life gets back to normal, which will be soon, we're going to look back on this time and be like, wow, I didn't realize how valuable that free time was to everybody. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I know people are out of work, whatever, but we're trying to utilize every single minute that, we have, for the most part. And watching 90 Day Fiance, that's another guilty pleasure. Yes, that's what we're doing. So
my hope out of it, and it's kind of something that I want to bring more into my comedy, is I hope it gives people a chance to reflect on where they are in life and what they're doing, and maybe just to chase their dreams, kind of like you were at that crossroads of like, do I go for training or do I go for comedy? Like, oh, this is a great chance to sit there and go, okay, yeah, I've always wanted to write a book, or I always wanted to open a coffee shop, or a flower store, or whatever it is. Like, this is a great chance to kind of reset your life, find those values and priorities, and go for it.
Well, it's funny you say that, Brian, because my wife is a great baker, bakes great cookies, brownies. And I said, now that she got laid off, I said, now's the time. You're fortunate enough that you're getting unemployment. You got to be just getting your brand out there. Like, this is the time. I mean, again, we're not going to have this time again. It's, so you got to get moving on it. And, I get a little frustrated when I hear people, and these are people that have, a savings and are healthy, and, they have a nice life, and you call them and I'll be like, hey, how you doing? They're like, I'm bored. And you're just like, listen, I don't see how that's possible. Like, I can understand you get depressed a little bit. I get that. I mean, it's the nature of what's going on.
Right.
But you gotta just keep doing. Like, there's just no reason. It's like we're not gonna have this time back. So that's why I love doing these certain things, because listen, when these guys are sleeping, and it's so funny. One of the big dog that I just showed you was crying at like 3 a.m. because he had to go out because it wasn't feeling good. And you got to remember, we have all these other dogs in the house. So all of a sudden it's 3 a.m, Brian, and I'm shifting everywhere. Like, like some of the dogs are in the bathroom, just to get this one dog out so we can go to the bath. It's like, it's crazy. You know what I mean? But I wouldn't have it any other way. It's awesome.
So yeah, it's and actually we were supposed to record yesterday, but you went. Rescue.
Yeah.
So we put it off so that you can go rescue.
Yeah, we got 6 little puppies from Mexico that came out over the border. It was great.
Yeah, so lastly, I guess, for people who love animals, love dogs, whatever, like, how can they get involved with?
Listen, I think the best thing anybody can do is foster a dog. There's always a shortage of people that are willing to foster, even if it's for a couple of weeks. That's the biggest problem. The shelters are a little clear right now because more people are fostering because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But what our worry is that once things get back to normal, people are going to give those dogs back because they're not going to be home and can take care of them. So what we're hoping is if you can foster for a couple of weeks, I mean, there's so many dogs that are just, needing to get out because they've been there for a while. I got to tell you, Brian, we have a dog right now who was in the shelter for a year. Think about that. Think about what you did last Memorial Day. Was in the shelter for a year. The notes on the dog was he's got a biting issue, behavioral problems, boom, boom, boom. We get the dog home. He's amazing. You put a dog in a little cage and try to pull him out by the collar. Yeah, of course he's going to have behavioral issues. We pulled this dog out. He's been nothing but amazing. I mean, it's like, so I'm not saying that there aren't those issues, because there are, but I think people are so quick to judge, like, oh, this dog's got issues. It's like, not really. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen so many of that where they say that the dog isn't that good, and then you pull these dogs out, they're amazing.
Yeah.
So that would be the one thing, if people can do anything, or if they can go to places and walk dogs or do whatever, like even that little kind of stuff, like, or donate a bag of dog food somewhere to a shelter, like all that stuff is just amazing and really helps.
That's awesome. And again, people can check out the littlereddog.com.
Yep.
Go to Instagram.
And on there, Bri, is dogs that are available for adoption too.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
They're on Instagram, the Little Red Dog, at Twitter at Little Red Dog Inc. and INC. And there are plenty of shelters out there, no matter
so many
that you can do. And if it,
well, I always laugh at that too.
There are cats, there are rabbits,
everything. There's rabbit. I know. I always laugh at that too, Brian, when I see like dogs that are being posted and they're in like LA, and somebody will write, if I didn't live in Minneapolis, I'd come get this dog. It's like, yeah, but there's shelters in Minneapolis. Like, go get. Yeah, it's like, it's a lame excuse. It's, because I see this too, where dogs will get a lot of money through fundraising, and then the minute the dog gets rescued, they're not donating. It's like, well, wait a minute, but the dog's out now. Why aren't Because I think they want to be kind of big spenders in the moment, and then once it's over with, they're done. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that just those little things. Fostering is great. Dog walking, all this, whatever, just those little things. And, again, that's, if you're a dog lover and you can't maybe have a dog in your house or whatever, but there's other things you can do that are just as good. And, people want to reach out to me through my website, more than welcome to.
And that's GaryCannon.com. There's Instagram and Twitter at Cannon Comedy. Gary, thanks, buddy, for coming on. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Pleasure having you, and I'm looking forward to getting back and doing some shows with you. And let's do this again soon.